On the 15th of April 1912, the RMS Titanic sank in the North Atlantic Ocean after striking an iceberg on her maiden voyage to New York City. For 73 years, the ship remained undisturbed 2.5 miles down from the surface. It wouldn't be until September of 1985 when an expedition led by the Oceanographic Institution and the French Institute for Ocean Science that the ship would be discovered, and from then, her story on the seabed began its own tale. In this documentary, the team on History Inside Nutshell will revisit the story of the Titanic's history and the remaining time she has left on the seafloor, from finding strange ways to raise the wreck, getting to know the real person who discovered the wreck, and beyond. Join us for the true story of the Titanic and her life below its watery grave. On the 18th of April 1912, an ocean liner docked at Pier 59 in the docks of New York City. This is the White Star berth, and this was supposed to be a great milestone, was supposed to occur, but instead, this liner docked 13 lifeboats, which she had collected in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean days earlier. This ocean liner was the Cunard liner, the RMS Carpathia, and the lifeboats she dropped off belonged to the RMS Titanic. The RMS Titanic was in the middle of her maiden voyage when, on the late evening of the 14th, she struck an iceberg, damaging her watertight compartments. Nearly 3 hours later, in the early hours of the 15th, she sank with a loss of over 1,500 passengers and crew. Although there were ships that were damaged or sunk after iceberg collisions, Titanic's sinking became infamous as it stood out as the sinking questioned the safety of persons on board and the amount of lifeboats that was allowed based on tonnage instead of capacity. While the world was gluing to headlines and inquiries into the disaster were ongoing in the United States and in the United Kingdom, ideas were surfacing on how to raise the Titanic's wreck. This began as early as 1912, when William Vincent Astor, the son of John Jacob Astor IV, who died in the sinking, wanted to find the Titanic's wreck and raise her to retrieve his father's body. Astor wasn't alone, where he was joined with the families of 2 more victims, Benjamin Guggenheim and George Dutton Widener. The families had contacted the Merritt and Chapman Derrick and Wrecking Company to complete the task, and how would they be able to do that? Well, by lowering dynamite from the recorded position of where the ship sank and, upon reaching the sea floor, blowing their wreck to kingdom come and dislodge the bodies of the dead. Sounds inhumane, doesn't it? Luckily, this idea was abandoned when scientists advised the families that the bodies had been pulverized by the pressure. But in reality, the bodies would have been consumed by the wildlife living in the ocean. In the end, the body of John Jacob Astor IV was recovered on the 22nd of April and was identified by the initials on his suit jacket, JJA. His body was returned to New York City and was buried on the 4th of May at the Trinity Church Cemetery. Unfortunately, Widener and Guggenheim's bodies were never recovered. Another idea involves a pretty unusual but a very realistic idea, and this was even tested by Adam Savage and Jamie Heineman on the TV show Mythbusters on Discovery Channel. Hey, does anybody remember that show? This idea involves raising the Titanic with thousands, if not billions, of ping pong balls. While realistic, the biggest flaw to this idea is how long the hose would be to go from the surface to 2.5 miles down to where the Titanic currently lays today. And the ping pong balls that are made out of plastic, and historically they were once made out of celluloid until the International Table Tennis Federation mandated a switch to plastic. From the moment the ping pong balls reach at the depth of 2.5 miles down, they would be imploded instantly. And even if they don't implode, it would take 1.5 billion ping pong balls to raise the Titanic from the seabed. Although this idea is considered plausible by the Mythbusters team, there are limitations to this idea. The first one is that this would work for smaller vessels under special circumstances if the smaller vessel was sunk at a shallow depth or at a dock like what the Mythbusters team did. And for larger vessels that are sunk at greater depths, like the RMS Titanic or the German battleship the Bismarck, it wouldn't work in these cases. One final idea actually involves raising the Titanic with, of all things, ice. Need we say more? This idea revolves around encasing both wreckage of the Titanic in the buoyant jacket of ice, and with the use of liquid nitrogen, this would freeze the wreck of the Titanic and would be brought up to the surface as a gigantic ice cube. This idea was proposed by a contractor named Arthur Hickey, and this theory was based on the premise that ice is less dense than water and would provide the lift needed to raise the vessel. Similar to having ice cubes in your tea or lemonade on a hot summer day. A major setback on this idea is that the amount of liquid nitrogen that would be required and the challenges of engineering associated with this endeavor that would make it likely impossible and impractical. 500,000 tons of liquid nitrogen would be used for this feat. As water tends to freeze, it expands outward, similar to water freezing inside plumbing pipes on a cold day. Any water on the inside of the ship that will expand outward and thus damage and destroy the wreck of the Titanic. And the wreck would be floated up since ice is less denser than water when frozen solid. Realistic? Yes. But would it happen? No. Some of these ideas are very realistic, but the depth is very challenging. When the First World War broke out, the Titanic and her wreck were forgotten about, and this continued on into the Great Depression and the Second World War, and by the middle of the Cold War, the subject of the Titanic was brought up again. The first attempt to find and salvage the wreck of the Titanic was proposed by a Southampton-based salvage company called the Risdon BZ Ltd. However, this became unsuccessful. By the 1960s and the 1970s, the chase was on to find the Titanic's wreck. By this time, technology for underwater expeditions have evolved, and this made it accessible to find shipwrecks at deep depths. This was different in comparison to using diving suits like the JIM suit that was used during the expedition to the Lusitania wreck in the 1930s. Modern technology has indeed gone beyond that. Many proposals were put forward, but many were abandoned for financial reasons. And by the beginning of the 1980s, this was about to change. When one expedition coming this close to find the Titanic wreck, this expedition was led by the International Expeditions with oilman Jack Grimm directing at the helm. Grimm was infamous for creating movies and had a reputation for seeking oils, myths, and legends. His credits included discovering Noah's Ark in Turkey, and when he took up the challenge to find the wreck of the Titanic, he had begun to raise funds for the expedition and hired Orson Welles to make a documentary.
Morgan Robertson wrote this remarkable piece of fiction about a luxurious ocean liner, larger than any ship existing in its time, filled with wealthy passengers and a rich cargo.
He was also known for having a big head, hey, no pun intended on this one, with consultants such as Fred Spies and William B. Ryan. The trio made arrangements to plan how the expedition was going to work. However, this expedition almost never happened as there was a rift over a monkey. This monkey's name was Titan, who was trained to guide and point a spot on the map to locate where the wreck was. Unimpressed, the crew of the expedition gave Grimm an ultimatum: the scientists who were part of the expedition or Titan. Feeling cross, Grimm chose scientists and the expedition was led without the monkey. Grimm and the team headed out to the North Atlantic Ocean between July and August 1980, but they had to abandon the project after losing the Sea Mark sonar they were using to find the wreck. A year later, the team returned to the ocean with the natural featured equipment including a sonar deep tow. This expedition was recorded and later, It was released under the title In Search of Titanic, which you can actually watch on YouTube. In the documentary, and whilst trying to battle bad weather, the team found an object that looked like a propeller. They had done it. They had found the Titanic, or so they thought. In fact, we still don't know what this object was, and it's likely we will never know. But there is one thing that we do know. Remember we said earlier that Jack Grimm and his team were so close to locate the Titanic's wreck? Well, they were close alright, by 1.5 miles. If Jack Grimm did manage to find the Titanic, new doors could have been opened for him. But however, it wasn't meant to be. Jack Grimm and the International Expeditions team made one final attempt to find the wreck in 1983, but they never discovered the wreck. Jack Grimm died in 1998 at the age of 72. The last and infamous expedition to attempt to find the wreck was led by Dr. Robert Ballard of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Ballard was an oceanographer and marine geologist who had a passion for shipwrecks. His interest began by watching movies like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. His fascination and attempt to seek out the Titanic wreck began in 1973. However, it wouldn't be until October 1977 that he began his first attempt to find the Titanic. During this attempt, the search for the wreck was conducted with using a salvage vessel sea probe. The sea probe has been equipped with sonar equipment and cameras that were attached to the end of the drilling pipe. Unfortunately, the expedition had to be abandoned when the drilling pipe broke. In 1982, Dr. Ballard attempted to try again when he approached the Navy to propose new technical equipment to find the wreck. This technical equipment was a system known as Argo or Jason. This system had different purposes, with Argo being a remote-controlled deep-sea vehicle that was equipped with sonar and cameras, and Jason tethered to Argo so Argo could take images and gather specimens. Despite this revolutionary technology, the Navy wasn't interested. They thought it was a waste of time, and financing a search for a lost ocean liner seemed pointless. However, they were interested in the equipment to search for two of their missing submarines, the USS Thresher, to which we did a video in the past, and the USS Scorpion. Knowing there was hope and an opportunity with using Argo or Jason, Ballard and the Navy agreed to offer to use the equipment to investigate the submarines, and if Ballard had time left before reaching a deadline, he could search for the Titanic. With this deal, Ballard began to prepare for this important dive. Along with Ballard, he worked alongside the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and the French National Institute of Oceanography. One of the members who joined the expedition was Bill Lang, who would go on to play a vital role in this expedition to find the wreck. Bill Lang was a research specialist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution's Director of Advanced Imaging and Visualization Laboratory. There isn't any information on his life and past connections with the Titanic, but however, Lang is known for being the most active and enthusiastic oceanographer in the world. Plus, he is a world-renowned expert in the underwater imaging, camera system design, and underwater surveying. Now that's a pretty impressive resume. Lang and his team at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution were invited by Ballard to join the expedition. And well, you know what they say, the rest became history. With the plans for the expedition, the team set off to find the submarines at the Titanic wreck in August of 1985. The team would sail on the research ship the RV Nor. Upon their arrival, the team successfully found the submarines, and with this success, the teams then attempted to find the wreck of the Titanic. However, they only had 12 days left before the end of the expedition. And knowing the little time they had, Dr. Ballard and French diving engineer Jean-Luc Michel made a decision to deploy Argo after making a discovery. This discovery was made while on a previous mission to find the submarines. The team discovered that when they imploded, The submarines had imploded from the immense pressure at depth, which left thousands of pieces of debris on the seabed, and this trail of debris had to lead the team to find the submarines. If they were able to do that, then why not follow the debris trail leading to the Titanic? So, that's what the team did. Argo was then deployed to scan across the sea floor, while the team took shifts for monitoring the video feed on board the Nor. Bill Lang was one of them who observed footage, and Lang was still looking at the footage when in the early morning of Sunday the 1st of September 1985, Lang saw Argo picking up footage of small debris at 41, 43, 32 north, 49, 56, 49 west. Ballard had been asleep around that early morning, but when Lang's excited screams echoed, "It's a boiler," Ballard got out of his bed and hurried to the screen. Suddenly, celebrations erupted on board the Nor. What the team discovered a Scotch Marine boiler, which had been recognized from a 1911 photograph of the Olympics boiler room, which was identical to the boilers that were on board the Titanic. The team, with the first discovery made by Lang, had found the wreck of the Titanic. The discovery erupted in celebration while Argo began showing pictures of the ship's hull. However, this suddenly eased when the voice says, "She sinks in 20 minutes." In response to this, the team felt guilty like they were dancing on someone's grave, and soon they all responded in a 2-minute silence. Before we continue on to this video, I would like to give a huge shout out to both Dennis and Alex Potato 1912 for providing footage and photos of the RMS Titanic in her wreck conditions we know today. Thank you guys. This would not be possible without you. Now they had discovered the Titanic, life for Ballard, Lang, and the rest of the team would never be the same again. In the years since the disaster, and as of this year, nearly 10 expeditions had been made to the wreck of the Titanic, and this included expeditions that involved filmmaker James Cameron, the organization of RMS Titanic Incorporated, and Lang, who returned to the Titanic in 2010 to capture pictures of the wreck with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. There has been guests that participated in some dives, which included actor Bill Paxton, featured in the film The Ghosts of the Abyss and the 1997 Titanic film, and Titanic Honor and Glory researcher James Penka. There has also been recoveries of artifacts, and this included the famous big piece that was recovered in the late 90s, the perfume bottles that were produced by survivor Adolphe Salfield, and coal from the Boiler Room Number 1 that were recovered from the 1994 recovery expedition, to which people can purchase, such as our very own Says, and of course, myself, have pieces of coal from the Titanic that were bought, and we also like to thank our fellow moderator and good friend, Biscuit_42, for showcasing the certificate of authenticity that he has for his piece of coal as well. In these few photographs, here are the artifacts from the RMS Titanic that were recovered and later be placed in various museums and also at traveling exhibits, such as the Titanic Belfast Museum, where she was built at along with her sister ships, Titanic Museums in Pigeon Forge in Branson, and also the Titanic Artifact exhibits in Las Vegas and Orlando, Florida. These artifacts showcase came from the Titanic and Immersive Voyage exhibit that I went to last year in Doraville, Georgia, to which a video of my trip can be found as a card or down in the description box below. For example, these officers' binoculars that were on board but were secured in a cabinet. The original second officer, David Blair, left the ship but did not hand it over the key while the ship was in Southampton at the time. These lifeboat plaques that were once on the Titanic's lifeboats that were dropped off by the Carpathia after the ship returned the survivors to New York. While some lifeboats were stored or sold off quietly, many were stripped of their plaques by souvenir hunters. These are some of the surviving ones that are in the traveling museum. There are 8 surviving deck chairs that are still in existence from the Titanic, to which at one point they were sat on by first-class passengers on the boat deck, or those struggling in the waters trying to cling on to them and use them as rafts. Although it's impossible to obtain one, you could actually obtain an Olympic deck chair. And even though it came directly from the Olympic, This megaphone was once used by Captain Smith to shout commands to direct passengers to the lifeboats or call back Lifeboat 6 to the sinking Titanic, to which Quartermaster Hickens refused to return to pick up survivors. This first-class lounge window once provided light and was designed in a Louis XV style with inspiration from the Palace of Versailles. At one point, the top would have a stained glass design. Now it sits behind glass and observed by onlookers. There have been artifacts that have been planned to be recovered that includes the infamous Diana Versailles statue that was rediscovered in 2024 after it was last seen during the 1986 expedition. However, there has been one artifact which was taken to court, and this was the infamous Marconi wireless apparatus machine. In 2020, RMS Titanic Incorporated wanted to retrieve the apparatus from the wreck. If permission was granted, then the organization would be allowed to minimally cut into the wreck and recover the apparatus. However, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, was against the recovery of the apparatus as it should be left undisturbed. If the apparatus was recovered, there was a chance that the wreck would collapse. Although the final decision was given for RMS Titanic Incorporated to carry out this recovery, the attempt was halted during the COVID-19 pandemic, and since then, no plans have been made to carry out the task. When it comes to diving to the Titanic, the wreck is very dangerous. There has been cases where during dives there have been technical faults, and during one expedition, a submersible got stuck underneath one of the ship's propellers at the stern. However, one non-scientific expedition ended in an implosion, which caused one of the worst peaceful submersible disasters in modern history. Although we don't need to go into further detail, and out of respect for the victims' families and our friends, the Titan implosion made the world stood still, especially considering how badly treated the submersible and the people were by the CEO of OceanGate Expeditions, Stockton Rush. Since the tragic implosion and after the publication of the United States Navy's final report in August of 2025, OceanGate has now suspended all exploration and commercial operations, though it remains to be seen whether tourist expeditions would reoccur again. Despite the tragic circumstances of the Titan implosion, RMS Titanic Incorporated decided to carry out an expedition in the summer of 2024, and during this recent expedition, it was discovered that the Titanic's forecastle deck was missing a port side railing. This 15-foot section served its purpose for officers and deck crew to observe the lines and the anchor while the ship was in dock. Although it was unstable for quite some time, it is believed and accepted by some that the railing possibly fell on the sea floor during the Titan implosion. Now, the railing of the Titanic and the wreck of the Titan submersible are actually no relation with each other, as the wreck of the Titan was actually found 490 meters away from the wreckage of the Titanic by the U.S. Coast Guard ROVs. However, the railing of the Titanic that actually did fell in this section right up here, as you can tell, actually fell due to natural deterioration from the salt water and the microbes that inhabit that area. And since 2022, the railing, which is also made of iron as well, was actually at the threat of collapsing, so which also has an influence on the state of the wreck of the Titanic today. Now, this 15-foot section of the railing is designed to be removable for access for the anchor well or have mooring lines up to the forecastle deck of the ship, especially when the ship was actually moored in Southampton before her maiden voyage. So basically, the anchor crane, which is actually at the very front of the ship, as you can tell by this Britannic model, it would normally be right here, which is where my finger is. If we look at the wreck of the HMHS Britannic today, which was actually discovered 10 years before the Titanic, the bow railing actually fell off when the ship twisted herself perpendicular before the massive hulk of the ship settled back down on the Aegean Sea floor. Now, with Britannic more accessible, we are actually able to learn more about the Titanic just for using her final sister ship, the Britannic, as reference, to which the bow railing, which is normally right here that fell off of the Britannic, is actually a pretty good example. Because of this, it is likely that the railing will never be recovered from the ocean floor, and the railing isn't the only sign that shows that the Titanic is now disappearing. In 2010, scientists discovered a form of bacteria species. In fact, it is a species of halophilic bacteria that's been found in the russicles of the ship's iron structure. This bacteria was called Halomonas titanicae. With this discovery, it is known that the bacteria was eating away the wreck, or in other words, the Titanic is disappearing. It is not clear when the Titanic will vanish from human eyes. Some people have argued the Titanic will disappear in our lifetimes, while others have argued that the Titanic will disappear in between century to 2 centuries at a time. We may never truly know what will happen, but all we know is that nature is claiming back the wreck, a man-made object. While the story of the discovery of the Titanic made explosive headlines and endless debates, it could become an endless game of fascinating and, on occasions, greed. With the Titanic's wreck being famous, it can easily be abused by those who want to make money out of the expeditions. However, scientists, divers, and oceanographers proved that a wreck could be treated with respect and fascination. While this is the case, we still have a lot to learn from the wreck itself. Now, with time running out for the once grand ocean liner, it is vital to respect the wreck with care when it comes to learning more of her story. Titanic is one of the most famous ocean liners in the world, and it's not only a marvel of history, but it is a grave site as well. The more we learn and treat the ship with care and respect, the more lessons she will give us before she disappears from our eyes forever.